Hi! As I mentioned at the end of my part 1 video titled Starting Clamps, Playtests, and Review, I decided to create a sequel video. Well, it's been about a month and here it is, the return of the Yonex Starting Clamp. But wait, I have two more starting clamps. I have the Babolat Red Starting Clamp and the Alpha Badminton Starting Clamp. In this video, I'll share with you my month-long experience with the Yonex Starting Clamp and review these two new starting clamps. Alright, let's go inside. In my first video, part 1, starting clamps, I featured this Yonex starting clamp along with the Alpha and the Babolat with the blue handles. And if you haven't seen that video, you might want to check it out because I'll be referencing some things in this video, so I provided the link below. Anyway, this Yonex starting clamp is something that I never used prior to the video. And my friend Matthew was kind enough to let me borrow it. In fact, he actually offered a pretty good price, so I ended up buying it. And mainly because I was impressed by the test results on the deformity of the strings and how gentle it was. So you might be wondering, why did Matthew sell it to me? Because of the way it performed. Well, he has a history with Toyozuki, and that's the maker of the Yonex starting clamp. They also make stringing machines, and he happens to own a machine made by Toyozuki. And he mentioned that there is actually a design flaw in this starting clamp. So if you take a look at this picture on the arrows on the left, you'll notice that there is a the arrow is pointing to some wear on the clamp lever. And on the right, you can see that there's a metal plate where there's an indentation, and that's caused by the contact of the lever and the metal plate. So the design flaw is where you'll notice that there's an indentation in that metal plate. And if you have a Yonex starting clamp, you might want to check out your starting clamp to see if that's happening. And he mentioned that it actually happens on all of the clamps, even on a stringing machine clamp. So it's definitely a design flaw. Now, I thought it was very interesting because I wouldn't have thought that, but Matthew actually pointed it out, and he actually did some modifications on his own stringing machines, which I thought was kind of interesting. And he's featured on a video if you want to check that out and get more information. He was in an interview with Racquet Stringing Tips, and I'll provide the link below, so you might want to check that out. So anyway, here's what I've been up to for the last month with this clamp. So what I decided to do was I typically would use the offset tube when I string, when I clamp using the starting clamp. So whether it's the starting the mains, I would place the tube out on the outside, and with the clamp on the outside of the offset tube. Try and hold it up here. So yeah, typically it would be placed out there, and mainly because on my Babolat starting clamp, that's how I always did it. So but because of the fact that the deformity was very little, I decided to just go straight with the starting clamp without the offset tube. And so that was my experiment. So for this past month, that's what I was doing. And I tested on strings that I do it on all the strings. So I tested it on all the strings, and so far so good. I haven't had any string breakage prematurely. Now, if there's a certain string that I feel like I need to protect, then I definitely would use the offset tube. So if you use a spacer, it's the same thing basically. But so anyway, that's my experiment. And yeah, so I'm thinking that with this Yonex clamp, that's one of the benefits, is that you probably can get away with without using an offset tube. All right, so now let's talk about the red Babolat clamps. So these are the most current ones that you can buy. And I'll provide the link if I can find out where you can get it and the actual cost. But this is not my clamp. I reached out to Josh at Babolat. So Josh, thank you for letting me borrow it for this video. But I'll be able to compare it now side to side with this blue one, which is mine. And I did mention in my previous video that between these two, some people actually prefer the blue one over the red one. But yeah, I'll be curious to see how it does side by side. Now, You'll notice that the width of the clamp is a little bit wider. It's an inch versus this one is 3/4 of an inch. The handles is the same. You can see that they match up that way. I mentioned on the Alpha clamp in my previous video that the handles are actually narrower. So I think that was the reason why the grip was so tight on that. There is something interesting though about this red Babolat clamp, and I'll bring it up to the camera and I won't tell you what it is, but maybe you can see what I'm talking about right there, if you can see that. But anyway, I'll reveal what I'm seeing in this clamp. That might be an interesting thing to find out. The next clamp that I'll be reviewing is this Alpha Badminton Starting Clamp. Now this is a starting clamp that, again, Matthew pointed out to me, and it's available at AliExpress, and that's in China. So I investigated it, and yeah, I ordered it, obviously. And it said it would take 4 weeks to come from China, but it actually arrived here in Hawaii in 2.5 weeks. And my initial impression when I first got it was the weight. For some reason, that's the first thing I noticed. So I'm gonna go ahead and weigh these starting clamps just to show you what the difference of the clamps are. So when I first picked up the Alpha Badminton Starting Clamp, yeah, I could tell that it was already heavy. So I was kind of curious to see what it actually weighed. So it came out to, it's reading at 7.2 ounces. So then I was curious, what do the other starting clamps weigh? So I have the Babolat Red one here, and it's coming out at 6.8 ounces. And this is the Yonex Starting Clamp at 6.1. And then I was just curious what the blue one is, what it weighed, so I put that on here too. And that was 5.4. So these 4 starting clamps that I have here are in order of weight. So obviously this was the heaviest and this was the lightest. Not that it mattered, but I think having something light is probably better than having something heavy. Now the other thing that I was not impressed by, but puzzled about, was these Chinese characters. So if you look at the picture, and if you know what these characters mean, yeah, please comment. I did ask one of my friends that can read Chinese, and what she said is one translation is that it means swing, and another translation was wave hit. So I'm thinking it must be a setting character, but anyway, if you can read Chinese, please comment below. I did want to mention something else about the Alpha Badminton Starting Clamp, and actually Matthew pointed it out to me before I even got the starting clamp. And one of the things is the design of this starting clamp. It has a roller in the front at the very top, right there, and he took a look at some of the pictures on the website, and I'll provide those pictures so you can see it also. But his theory is that it's probably gonna be a little bit gentler as far as the contact of the 2 metal pieces, the plate and the lever. So it might eliminate that that indentation, or the design flaw that this Yonex starting clamp has with that. And so yeah, that'll be interesting to see. Also, he mentioned that the design of this thick clamp is very similar to the Wilson Bayardo light stringy clamp. So you can check that out in the picture here. All right, so next I wanted to tell you about the 4 strings that I'll be testing the starting clamps on. And like in my previous video, I have a 18 gauge polyester here, a 17 gauge synthetic gut, 16 gauge multi-filament, and on this Prince Premier Touch, it's a lot like natural gut, so I decided to use this, but I'll be using a 15 light gauge on this particular string. Now the clamps, I already tested the Yonex, so I'll be using the results and comparing it to the other 2 clamps that I'll be testing, the Babolat Red Starting Starting Clamp and the Alpha Badminton Starting Clamp. Now what I'm going to be doing is testing these clamps not only on how well it holds at a high tension, which will be at 65 pounds, I'm gonna also check deformity. That means I'm gonna measure the amount that it smashes down the string. And the third area is the ease of use. So again, if you refer to my first video, I did explain in detail how that was gonna happen. So I'll go ahead and come back to you with the results. All right, so I just finished the play test on the starting clamps, and I did want to talk about the 3 criteria that I mentioned earlier. And that first criteria is its ability to hold at a high tension, which was at 65 pounds. So we'll start off with this Alpha Badminton Starting Clamp. And I have a picture here that I figured out that would be the setting that I would keep it at for most strings. But I accidentally forgot to tighten it when I did the Luxlon 18 gauge. So it did slip. And so what I had to do was with this dial, you turn it clockwise to tighten it. And I just moved it 1 notch over, so it was there. And then when I did the 17 gauge and the 16 gauge strings, I just moved it back to that original setting. And then when I did the 15 Light Premier Touch, then I went counterclockwise and I just moved it over 1 notch. And I really wish I knew what these characters mean, but I found that that worked. And so it was nice that it did hold. The clamp did handle the 65 pounds. And yeah, so this worked out really well. All right, so next we have the Babolat Red Starting Clamps. And with this one, I had no issues with it. It worked really well. Again, I clamped it right about where the eyelets are and kept it at that distance from the tip of the jaws. So yeah, no issues with this. It worked really well. The second criteria for my playtest is deformity. And I'm defining that as how much the starting clamp smashed down onto the string when it was used. So again, I had the 4 strings that I mentioned earlier that I was using for this playtest, all strung at 65 pounds. This number that's listed under each of the strings is what's on the packaging. But when I measured the string outside of the area that I clamped, this was the actual number I was getting. So even though it was 1.12 here, this is the actual measurement here for each of these strings, this first number. Now the second number is what I measured the area underneath where the starting clamp was used, and I did have to find the thin area of the string because it did smash down, so there were some thick and some thin areas of the string. So you'll see that second row of numbers there. And then the third number that's in red type is the difference between these 2 numbers. Now you notice that even though I did a test on the Alpha and the Babolat Red, I went ahead and included the Yonex and the Babolat Blue to show some comparison here. So let's take a look at these numbers here. So let's go with the Alpha Badminton Starting Clamp. So you'll see how it came out comparable to the Yonex. I mean, the differential is exactly the same on all 4 of the strings. So that was quite impressive for the Alpha Badminton Starting Clamp. And then when I used tested the red Babolat, you could see compared to the blue one, you could see that it actually didn't deform the string as much. 0.02 here and 0.05. This one didn't have any right here, and this had 0.02. Again, there was less here on the 16 gauge multi-filament, and consistent with this first number here, this was the same right here. So that was quite impressive for the Babolat Red. So again, by looking at all of these 4 starting clamps, you can see how they all compared. And of the 4, I would say that this Yonex, the Alpha, and the Babolat Red, actually the numbers came out really close to each other, as you can see. And now the Babolat Blue is the one that's standing out from the others. All right, we're getting into the third criteria that I used for this playtest, and that was the ease of use. So I'm gonna go ahead and compare the Yonex up against the Alpha Badminton Starting Clamp. So a couple of the pros on this Alpha is that you could see from the numbers how comparable it was to the Yonex clamp in terms of deformity. So that was good. What I didn't tell you though, this clamp is only $70. Well, only 70 compared to 250. So this is a good value if you're looking for something of this type of a starting clamp. A couple of the cons though is that I noticed that the weight, it's an ounce heavier than the Yonex, so I felt like this was a little bit heavy. In terms of the clamp lever, when you press down on it, the Yonex is a little smoother. So this one is, I did put a little grease on the rollers just to see if it would help, but the Yonex still does feel a little bit smoother. Now the only area that remains to be seen is if this Alpha will have that same problem with the clamp lever up against the metal plate, and if it's going to cause any kind of indentation. So yeah, I guess I'll have to use it some more, or maybe I should send this to Matthew and he could try test it out. But either way, it's going to take a little bit more time to figure out if this is going to hold up, but and maybe that could be a future video. Next up, we have the Red Babolat Starting Clamp. Now this is the one that I mentioned in my previous video that I never owned or tried. So again, Josh, thanks for sending this. And when I reached out to other stringers that own both of these, they actually told me that they preferred the blue over the red. But after performing the playtest on Deformity, you could see the numbers, how it matched up. It was comparable to the Yonex and the Alpha in terms of the deformity. Now there is something about this clamp that I noticed from the beginning before I started the tests, and I want to bring this up so you can actually see this again, and you can see right there, there's a gap right there in the jaws of the starting clamp. So if you look at this really closely, the only area that the clamps meet up is right at the tip, right there. Everything else, going back from the eyelets to the hinge, there is a gap right there. So when it comes down on the string, yeah, I can see how it doesn't put as much stress on the string itself. So I think that's why the numbers came out the way it did, and why it outperformed the blue one in terms of deformity. The other good thing about this clamp is that it has a nice padding, and it is wider at the head, so that could also help with the ability to hold. But this could also be a con too, because sometimes having a wide head like this could get in the way if you're clamping down in a throat area, especially if you're using a spacer or an offset tube. But I think the pros outweigh the cons on this one. So I don't know the cost. I know that it's between $60 and $85, but as soon as I find out where you can get it from, then I'll post it in the video description down below. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. I know I had fun playtesting these starting clamps. Thanks for watching, happy stringing, and let your clamps play.